Friends, thank you for being here today. Washington is lying to you. They are walking the United States military and your economy into the most devastating two-front trap in modern global history. Right now, the media, the politicians, and the so-called foreign policy experts in the Beltway are operating under a fatal delusion. The assumption that Iran is fighting this war alone, isolated, outmatched, and waiting to be overwhelmed by American air and naval superiority. That assumption is dead. It is completely, irreversibly wrong. Yemen has just entered the war. And I do not mean they have entered with political statements, diplomatic posturing, or symbolic gestures of solidarity. I mean they have entered militarily. The Houthi movement, which commands the most strategic territory in Yemen, has launched heavy, sustained military strikes capable of shutting down the central arteries of global trade. If you think this is just another distant desert skirmish, a localized conflict thousands of miles away that will not affect your life, you need to wake up. Look at your gas pump. Look at your grocery bills. Look at your retirement account, your 401k, and the evaporating purchasing power of your life savings. Look at the brutal, undeniable math of this conflict. Right now, as we speak, the United States Navy is firing $10 million interceptor missiles to shoot down $50,000 drones. You're watching the financial and strategic bleed-out of American power in real time, broadcast on the evening news, while the architects of this disaster smile and tell you everything is under control. Understand this immediately. The entire geometry of this war just shifted. We are no longer dealing with a single point of friction. We are facing two vital maritime choke points, multiple synchronized fronts, one inescapable trap. Listen closely, because the consequences of this strategic failure are no longer theoretical. They are already at your doorstep. Let me walk you through the exact anatomy of this two-front chokehold. To understand the magnitude of what is happening, you have to stop looking at the map like a politician and start looking at it like a general. Controlling the open oceans means absolutely nothing if your enemy controls the doorways. And right now, the doorways to the global economy are slamming shut. On the eastern flank, you have the Strait of Hormuz, controlled by Iran. Roughly 20% of the world's global oil consumption passes through that narrow waterway every single day. On the western flank, you have the Red Sea and the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, now under the operational threat of Yemen. This is the passageway to the Suez Canal. Between 12 to 15% of all global trade passes through this corridor. We are talking about tankers carrying liquid gold, crude oil, and liquefied natural gas. We are talking about massive container ships carrying manufactured goods, microchips, medical supplies, and consumer products. We are talking about bulk carriers moving the grain and fertilizer that keep the world from starving. The strategy playing out before our eyes is not about matching American ships gun for gun. It is about asymmetric strangulation. What Yemen has demonstrated is that they do not need to sink an American aircraft carrier to win. They simply need to threaten the commercial shipping lanes enough to break the system. And the system is incredibly fragile. Modern global supply chains operate on a just-in-time model. There are no massive stockpiles waiting in warehouses anymore. When a shipping corridor is threatened, maritime insurance rates out of Lloyd's of London do not just go up, they skyrocket to the point of commercial impossibility. When those waters become uninsurable, the major shipping conglomerates, Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, MSC, are forced to reroute. They must send their massive vessels all the way down around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. This adds weeks to the journey. It burns millions of gallons of extra bunker fuel. It creates a massive shortage of available shipping containers worldwide. And who pays for that? You do. The American consumer pays for it in the form of reignited, uncontrollable inflation. By opening this western front, Yemen has ended the narrative that America is fighting a localized containment mission. A synchronized, multi-front pressure system has been activated. An axis is formed, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea, and they hold the keys to the global supply chain. Two choke points, two fronts, one trap. Before we move on to how the Pentagon walked right into this, I want to hear from you. Do you think Washington is intentionally blinding us to this reality? Or is it just sheer arrogance and incompetence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read as many as I can. We have to confront the sheer arrogance of empire and the fatal miscalculation regarding Yemen. How did Washington get this so wrong? How did the greatest intelligence apparatus in human history fail to see this coming? It comes down to the fatal flaw of all dying empires: hubris, arrogance, the persistent, blinding Western arrogance of looking at Yemen and seeing only a broken, starving, impoverished nation incapable of challenging a modern superpower. The Pentagon planners looked at Yemen and saw men in sandals with AK-47s. They did not see the battle-hardened, technologically adapting military force that was actually being forged in the fires of a brutal war. To understand what Yemen is capable of today, you must look at what they survived yesterday. For 7 long years, Saudi Arabia waged what can only be described as a genocidal war against Yemen. But let us be very clear. This was not Saudi Arabia acting alone. The entire weight of Western logistical and intelligence support was behind that campaign. The United States military was patrolling the Red Sea. American intelligence officers were in the command rooms providing targeting data. American KC-135 tankers were flying mid-air refueling missions, so Saudi F-15s could relentlessly bomb Yemeni infrastructure around the clock. America helped enforce a devastating blockade, a medieval siege tactic designed to keep food, medicine, and basic necessities out of the country. There are documented reports of coalition forces stopping small boats trying to smuggle basic medical supplies into Yemen, confiscating the medicine, and dumping it into the ocean. That is the level of absolute strangulation Yemen faced. They were bombed relentlessly. Their hospitals, water treatment facilities, and agricultural centers were pulverized. And yet, with all of Saudi Arabia's unlimited petrodollar wealth, with all the cutting-edge Western military technology, with complete and total air superiority, Yemen did not fall. Yemen did not surrender. What finally forced a ceasefire in that conflict was not Yemen begging for mercy. What forced the ceasefire was Yemen launching highly coordinated, precise drone and cruise missile strikes deep into Saudi territory, bypassing American-made Patriot missile defense batteries and devastating Saudi Aramco oil installations. They hit the Saudis so hard and so precisely that Riyadh had to beg for an exit strategy. Yemen won that war. A starving, blockaded nation defeated a trillion-dollar coalition. And over the years since that ceasefire, Yemen has not been resting. They have been doing exactly what Iran has been doing for 25 years, and what Hezbollah did in Lebanon, mass-producing asymmetrical weapons, moving them underground, and preparing for the ultimate conflict. Stop underestimating these forces. The military that survived a 7-year siege and defeated a regional hegemon is the exact same military that has just opened the Western Front against the United States. And Washington walked right into it, completely blind to the reality on the ground. Now, we must look at the battlefield and face the asymmetric math of our own financial ruin. Wars are not won merely by who has the biggest explosions. They are won by logistics, industrial capacity, and the cost-exchange ratio. Right now, the United States is on the wrong side of the most disastrous cost-exchange ratio in the history of warfare. When Yemen or Iran launches a swarm of loitering munitions, commonly known as suicide drones, they are firing weapons that cost, on average, around $50,000 to produce. They are built in decentralized, dispersed underground factories. They use commercially available components. They can be manufactured by the thousands. When the United States Navy detects these inbound threats, they cannot afford to let one slip through. A single drone hitting an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is unacceptable. So, the commander of that vessel authorizes the launch of a Standard Missile-2, SM-2, or an SM-6. Do you know what those cost? An SM-2 costs roughly $2.1 million. An SM-6 costs over $4 million. In some cases, to intercept ballistic threats, we are firing SM-3 missiles that cost up to $10 million apiece. You do not need a degree in advanced economics to understand how this ends. We are firing a multi-million-dollar weapon to destroy a $50,000 drone. Every time that exchange happens, the enemy cheers. They are bleeding us dry. They are intentionally draining our limited stockpiles of high-end interceptors. Every missile America fires defending a cargo ship in the Red Sea against Yemen is a missile it cannot fire defending an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf against Iran. And the problem goes much deeper than just interceptors. We are witnessing the attrition of high-value strategic assets that the mainstream media is completely ignoring. The United States relies heavily on its radar and logistical superiority. But the reality on the ground is shifting. There are highly credible open-source intelligence reports indicating the loss of a multi-million-dollar E-3 Sentry AWACS radar plane in the region. Furthermore, KC-135 aerial refueling tankers have been targeted and damaged. Why does this matter to you? Because America's vaunted stealth fighters, the F-35s and F-22s, cannot operate effectively over long distances without those refueling tankers. They do not have the range. If the enemy pushes the tankers back or destroys them, the American fighters are neutralized without a single dogfight taking place. You lose the airborne radar, you lose the tankers, and suddenly the most technologically advanced air force in the world is fighting blind and out of gas. This exposes the fundamental rot at the core of the American military-industrial complex. Our defense industry is designed to enrich contractors, not to win wars of attrition. It is designed to take 20 years and billions of dollars to build a single fighter jet, or $13 billion to build a single Ford-class aircraft carrier. We build exquisite, expensive, irreplaceable platforms. We do not have the industrial capacity to mass-produce cheap, lethal weapons rapidly. When we fire our interceptors, we cannot replace them quickly. The factories are not there. The supply lines of raw materials are dependent on China. I want you to answer a question for me right now in the comments. How long do you honestly think our economy can sustain firing $10 million missiles at $50,000 drones before we completely bankrupt ourselves? Sound off below because your tax dollars are paying for this math? Which brings us to the most dangerous whisper in Washington today, the absolute delusion of a ground war. Because the air and naval campaign is financially unsustainable and strategically failing, you are beginning to hear whispers about boots on the ground. Think tanks are writing white papers, generals are giving closed-door briefings, the deployment of Marines, the seizure of Iranian islands in the Strait of Hormuz, securing the coastal launch sites. Let me be absolutely clear. A ground war in this theater would be the final, suicidal act of the American empire. Anyone in Washington advocating for this is suffering from a delusion so profound it borders on treason. They are operating under the outdated assumption that this will be a repeat of Desert Storm in 1991 or the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Let us contrast the geography. Iraq was a flat, open desert. Its military had been decimated by a decade of crushing sanctions and relentless no-fly zone bombings. Its population hated its dictator. And even then, it cost the United States trillions of dollars, thousands of American lives, and 2 decades of quagmire. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. It is an absolute fortress of geography. The western border is protected by the Zagros Mountains, a rugged, imposing natural defensive wall. The north is protected by the Alborz Mountains. For 25 years, while the United States was busy chasing insurgents in the sands of Afghanistan and the streets of Fallujah, Iran was preparing for one specific scenario, an American invasion. They have hollowed out those mountains. They have built vast subterranean complexes, entirely impervious to American bunker buster bombs. These underground cities house massive stockpiles of anti-ship cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and swarm drones. The strikes we have seen so far, the ones panicking the global markets, are coming from their secondary coastal installations. The deep mountain reserves have not even been activated yet. The moment an American amphibious assault force attempts to land, they will find out exactly what 25 years of defensive preparation looks like. But the nightmare does not stop at the Iranian border. This is where the multi-front trap snaps shut. If the United States commits heavy ground forces to a conflict with Iran, what happens on the flanks? The axis of resistance does not sit still. While American forces are bogged down in the Zagros Mountains, heavily armed and battle-hardened Iraqi resistance militias will immediately pour southward into Kuwait and northern Saudi Arabia. Simultaneously, the Yemeni forces, the ones who already proved they can penetrate Saudi territory at will push northward into southern Saudi Arabia. Look at the map. If Iraqi militias push south and Yemeni forces push north, the entire Arabian Peninsula is engulfed. The American military bases stationed in those Gulf nations, the command centers, the airfields, the logistics hubs, will be completely flanked. They will be cut off, surrounded by hostile forces, operating in countries whose governments could collapse into chaos overnight. Where does the American military retreat to when the bases themselves are under siege? Any escalation by Washington, any attempt to double down on this failure with ground troops, is not a display of strength. It is a step deeper into a generational meat grinder. There is no easy exit. There is no glorious victory parade waiting at the end of this. There is only a compounding catastrophe of casualties and strategic humiliation. All of this leads to the ultimate endgame, the descent of a macroeconomic guillotine. Now, we come to the most critical part of this analysis, the part that directly affects you, your family, your community, and your future. The true target of this multi-front trap is not the hull of an American destroyer. The true target is the American economy. We are facing the descent of a macroeconomic guillotine. What happens to the United States when both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait are effectively closed to Western shipping? Let me paint you the picture of the immediate future if Washington does not reverse course. If Saudi oil installations are hit again and the flow of crude through Hormuz is choked off, the global energy market will experience a shock unparalleled since the 1970s. We are not talking about a gentle increase at the pump. Serious, sober financial analysts on Wall Street and in the City of London are quietly preparing for crude oil to hit $150 a barrel. Many are projecting it could easily breach $200 a barrel. Think about what $200 oil does to the American economy. It means gasoline hits $7, $8, maybe $9 a gallon across the country. But it is not just about what it costs you to drive to the grocery store. It is about the diesel that powers the 18-wheelers that stock those grocery stores. When the cost of diesel doubles, the cost of transportation doubles. When transportation costs double, the price of everything on the shelves skyrockets. We will see supply chains, already strained, completely shatter. We will see massive shortages of liquefied natural gas heading into Europe, freezing their economies and destroying their industrial base. We will see the price of petrochemicals and fertilizers surge, which directly impacts the global food supply. Agricultural yields will drop, and the price of basic foodstuffs will become unaffordable for the working class. You will see inflation, the kind of hyperinflation that destroys nations, return with a vengeance. And what happens to your life savings? What happens to the stock market when energy costs cripple corporate profits? Wall Street will bleed. Trillions of dollars in wealth, the 401ks and pension funds of hard-working Americans who spent 40 years building a nest egg will be wiped out in a matter of months. This is the enemy's true strategy. They have read our history better than we have. They know they cannot march an army to Washington, D.C. and force a surrender, but they know they do not have to. They are practicing the oldest strategy of asymmetric warfare: bleed the empire. Make the cost of staying in the Middle East infinitely higher than the cost of leaving. They are applying maximum economic pressure to fracture the political will of the United States. They know that an American public facing $9 gas, empty grocery shelves, and depleted retirement accounts will not tolerate an endless, unwinnable war on the other side of the planet. Any political administration, Democrat or Republican, that oversees the economic ruin of the middle class in pursuit of an unwinnable foreign war will face absolute political collapse at home. The scoreboard for an American president is the stock market, consumer confidence, and the price of gas. The moment that scoreboard turns blood red, the political mandate for the empire evaporates. But to truly understand the sheer scale of this trap, we have to look beyond the battlefield and examine the deliberate execution of the United States dollar. This is where the geopolitical failure connects directly to the total financial collapse of the American empire. For 50 years, the American standard of living has been entirely subsidized by one undeniable reality: the petrodollar. The agreement was simple. Saudi Arabia and the OPEC nations sold their oil exclusively in US dollars, and in exchange, America provided absolute military protection. That system forced every single nation on earth to hold American dollars just to keep their lights on. It allowed Washington to print trillions of dollars out of thin air, export our inflation to the rest of the world, and run up a $34 trillion national debt without facing immediate consequences. That era is over. The multi-front trap we are witnessing right now is the final nail in the coffin of the petrodollar. While the United States is distracted, bleeding its strategic reserves and firing multi-million-dollar interceptors at cheap drones, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are watching, and they are executing a master plan. They are not firing missiles. They are moving capital. They are systematically dismantling the dollar's monopoly on global trade. We weaponized the SWIFT banking system. We weaponized sanctions. We thought we could starve our enemies into submission. Instead, we forced the rest of the world to build an alternative financial system. Look at what is happening right under Washington's nose. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar, has joined the BRICS bloc. They are now openly entertaining the sale of crude oil in Chinese yuan. Do you understand what that means? The Saudis looked at the humiliating defeat in Yemen. They looked at the American military's inability to secure the Red Sea, and they made a cold, calculated decision. American military protection is no longer a guarantee, and if the protection is gone, the exclusivity of the dollar is gone. When the axis of resistance threatens the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, they are not just threatening the flow of oil, they are accelerating the de-dollarization of the global economy. If the Middle East burns and energy prices skyrocket, the BRICS nations will step in to offer discounted energy trades entirely outside the US dollar system. Central banks around the world know exactly what is coming. Why do you think China and Russia are hoarding physical gold at record, unprecedented levels? Why are foreign central banks quietly dumping US Treasury bonds? Because they see the undeniable math. They see a US government spending $1 trillion every 100 days just to service the interest on its debt. They see a military overextended in an unwinnable multi-front war. They are abandoning the sinking ship. When the global demand for the US dollar collapses, all those trillions of dollars floating around the globe will come rushing back to American shores. That is when the true hyperinflationary firestorm begins. This is not just a loss of global prestige. It is the immediate, brutal downgrade of your standard of living. The imported goods you rely on, the electronics, the vehicles, the medicine, their prices will double, triple, and quadruple, because the currency you're using to buy them will have lost its imperial premium. The trap in the Middle East is merely the physical manifestation of a much larger, global financial war. Washington walked blindly into a military meat grinder, entirely ignorant of the fact that the real war was being waged against the US Treasury. The enemies of America do not need to invade our shores. They simply need to force us to bankrupt ourselves, defending choke points we no longer control, using a currency the rest of the world no longer wants. This is the multi-front trap. The Axis has escalation dominance at every level. They have the will, the geographical advantage, and the sheer demographic determination that a comfortable, distracted America completely lacks. This is not about saving democracy abroad. It is not about protecting international norms. It is about the structural financial survival of the United States. The American empire is overstretched, drowning in $34 trillion of national debt, and fundamentally broken at the industrial level. The trap has sprung. The bill for decades of arrogant, short-sighted foreign policy has finally come due. Before you click away, I want to hear from every single one of you watching this. What steps are you taking right now to protect your family and your life savings from this incoming economic storm? Leave a comment down below. We need to be sharing this information with each other because the government will not warn you. Prepare yourselves. Secure your assets. Question everything you're being told by the mainstream media. Washington is not going to save you from the economic hurricane they have engineered. Thank you for listening, and God bless.